Today we're going to be doing a review of Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. So just off the bat, I want to start out by saying I had a fun time reading this book, but this review is going to be more negative. I have a lot more qualms with this book than I do have positive things to say. Just getting that out there to start. So what is this review going to have in it? We're going to talk about characters, plot, premise, structure, difficulty, etc. Timestamps will be down below in the description. I will have this chaptered, and let's get into it. So the premise of this book. So this is a high fantasy standalone novel. There are 3 geographic areas of this world. There is the West, the South, and the East. And there is conflict between all of these places, and then there is this big bad fire-breathing dragon and draconic army, draconic magic that is coming back to life, and it seems like a reign, and that it's going to be the end of an age in this world. So that's kind of what you're building up to throughout this. Let's talk about the structure of this book. So it is a third-person book. It follows 4 different main characters. So you follow Ede, who is a person from the South that has infiltrated and lived in the West in the courts for many years, and she is a mage of the Priory. You have Tanae, who is from the East. She has been training her entire life to be a dragon rider, and dragons are highly revered gods in the East, and as a dragon rider, she would be highly revered within society. You follow Loth, who is a friend of the Queen of the West, Sabran's, and through circumstances that he did not agree to, he is now in the South that has been quarantined. The West and the East are both not doing well with the South because they have changed their religion to those of the fire breathers, and there's much of the draconic plague here. So you do see the plague in this book. And then we follow Niclay Roos, who is an older character, and he has been banished by the Queen of the West, Sabran, from society, and now lives in the East. So those are your 4 main characters you're following. The chapters are named like North or West, East, and South. And that is not based on where the character is from. That is based on where the character is as you're reading it. So if someone from the West is in the South, at the time, the chapter is going to be titled South. Something to keep in mind as you're reading. So that's the main structure. So now let's talk about difficulty of this book, because this book is a chunker. It is 800 pages long. And something that I've heard a lot in people's reviews of this book, especially earlier on when it was first published, is that it took them a long time to understand what was going on. Like, they were confused for hundreds of pages. So what I would suggest you do, if you choose to read this, is read the first few hundred pages pretty slowly. So this is broken up, I think, into 6 parts. Yes. So read the part 1 fairly slowly, and there's a few maps at the beginning, and I would continuously reference those, because in part 1, you're introduced to all of your main players, and you're introduced to a lot of cities, places people are from, places people are at, places people have been, places that are in conflict, etc. So if you're reading this physically, I would reference the map in the front and have it tagged. If you're reading this on ebook, I would recommend either bookmarking it so it's easy to jump to, or taking a picture of it. If you're listening to this on audio, I don't know if there's a map available. If there is, I'll link it below if there's a map online. But I would recommend getting a picture of the map that you can reference as you're listening, because I can see this being extremely confusing if you don't know where things are happening. Let's look at the map for a second. So here's the first page of it. This is all the south with a bunch of different kingdoms in it. This is the west that has one kingdom. And then this is the east, which is all one kingdom, but well, kind of. This is kind of its own thing, and this up here is kind of its own thing. Okay, so let's talk about like what's going on with these places. So you have the west, where you have Queen Sabran. She is thought to be the blood of their god, essentially. So they pray to the saint, who is like the god of the virtuedom, which is their religion, and she's thought to be his descendant. And when she is out in public speaking to her people, she refers to herself in the we, so her and the saint. She speaks for both of them. The south, at least parts of the south, followed the virtuedom and was not in conflict with the west, until recently, when the draconic creatures began to wake back up, and the kingdoms in the south had professed now their alignment to this draconic creature's religion, etc. And then you have the west, who does not believe, who is against the draconic beings, and does not follow the west's religion, their virtuedom. They think they're false gods, and they follow the dragons, who, there are two types of dragons in this. There is the water dragons, and those are the ones of the east. Did I say west before? I meant east. And these dragons of the east are water dragons, and they are seen as gods by their people. And they are actually alive today. So they feel that they're gods, they can interact with their gods. The fire-breathing dragons or wervins are, they're like antithesis. Like they do not get along with those. The people of the West kind of don't know that there's a difference between these two creatures, which is kind of what causes conflict. So the West doesn't see the dragons as gods. They think they're praying to worms, which is like WYRMS. And the East, I just think they see their gods. It's hard to say why they hate the West. I don't really think they do, but I don't know. I was a little confused about this point. Okay, let's talk more about characters. So I kind of introduced the structure, and you follow those four main characters, but there's a lot of other characters. So you have those four main perspectives that you're following, but there are a lot more characters introduced. There's quite a number, and they all felt distinct. I was never confused about what character was what, but this is where I'm going to get into my first problem with the book, and that is the main characters, not just the people you follow, but some of the main characters outside of that, like the queen as well. I did not buy some of their character arcs. I felt that their changes happened so quickly and so dramatically that it didn't really make sense to me. And this isn't for all of them, but I just found that some of these character arcs, I just was, at the end, I was just like, they're doing actions, they're changing their ways, and I'm just like, I don't believe you. Like, I don't believe that that's true. You haven't shown me them build up to that point. It's just like a light switch, and suddenly they're different. Editing me, should I change my background to be this? This is cool. Anyway, another thing I want to talk about with characters that I didn't get into is it's not just the main characters. It's like side characters doing things and making decisions, which kind of goes into the plot, that are so unbelievable. Like, it was just to move the plot forward that they did this action, and it just does not make sense with their character, or if you don't know their character well, with their like rank and their place in society. It really just felt like, okay, well, we need X to happen, so my character is going to do Y so that things keep moving along. Oh, another thing with the characters. So there are multiple instances where a character is introduced as a friend or as someone a protagonist cares about or one of your main characters care about, and then they're killed off. I don't mind killing characters off. That's not what bothers me. What bothers me with this is that the characters, I never felt that there was a point. In each instance, I'm like, oh, you introduced, like, in some of the instances, I'm like, I feel like you killed this character off to give your main character a reason to be grieving and a reason to change or something to that effect. But I never felt that I didn't care about this relationship. This relationship wasn't built up in a way for me to feel bad about this person dying. Like, I was just like, why did we, when it happened the first time, I'm like, why did we introduce this character in the first place? Like, what was the goal here? So yeah, that was a frustrating thing that happened more than once. And I guess this kind of goes into plot, but this is also about characters. I felt that the Queendom in the West, mainly Sabran and Ede, who is the person from the Priory, I felt like their story was where the author started with this book. And she had an idea for the world, and she had an idea for the final conflict and how she wanted the book to end. And then the rest of the story was just built up to get there, which is why the character arcs didn't feel believable, but also the plot didn't feel believable. So I kind of talked about the plot. The plot was fun. I enjoyed myself. I had a good time reading. I was always interested in what was going to happen next, and I was having fun. I was like, oh yeah, let's see what's going to go on. But everything happened for your characters so easily. Like, there was just like the most absurd things. Your character needed to know some information, so someone monologues. Your character needs a specific thing, and suddenly they happen to find the only person who has access to it. I mean, it was just like, there was a point where something didn't go their way, and I was like, oh, I'm glad that happened. I'm glad something didn't go their way. And it ended up going their way later, but the stakes just felt so much lower because everything was too easy for the characters. Especially for some characters. Like, there's some characters who are badasses, and there are some characters who were, like, not, and I'm like, this conversation went too well. Like, you didn't do that good of a job in what you were trying to accomplish. But anyway, okay, me again, just to harp on this point a little bit more, because I didn't get into it as much as I could have. Not only did the character decisions not make sense that helped move the plot forward, but I struggle with the premise of the book itself, and I don't want to get into it too much because of spoilers, but how the world and the magic and like how deeply ingrained these the detesting of these other nations was, I had, and with like the how everything comes together, like there are like multiple tracks of information and you're following characters from all over, so obviously they're going to come together at some point. That's not a spoiler, but the way that these things came together through the lore of the world did not completely make sense. Like, it felt like the author had an idea and just decided that that was the way it was. And I didn't say this before, but this book, it felt like it could have either been a lot longer or a lot shorter. It could have been a lot shorter, and it could have cut out some characters. It could have cut out some of the unnecessary things that happened along the way that resolved immediately. And it could have just been a shorter book where you kind of got to the bare bones of the plot. Because you start the book, you read the first 250 pages, and you know what's going to happen. I mean, it's not that surprising. And Conversely, it could have gone longer and you could have fleshed out the characters a little bit more, fleshed out the world a little bit more, and just like given it a little bit more editing and love, and like tightened up some of the storylines and tightened up some of the lore and gave you more of it so that these things made sense. Because it didn't really make sense. I ended the book and I was like, yeah, I don't get it. Like, it felt like it was maybe a good idea in their head, but like the execution of the idea was like, oh, maybe it wasn't as cool as it sounded, which sounds mean. Because I mean, I finished this 800-page book. I obviously didn't hate it. And I'm not trying to be mean, but that is just the impression the reading of this book gave. But let's talk writing. So the writing was fine. It was descriptive in places, and it was kind of just there to get the job done. It was not, the prose wasn't too like laden. The prose wasn't too laden with description, but it was giving you enough. And yeah, it was also easy to read. I wouldn't find, this isn't complicated prose. There weren't many words that you had to look up. So it's very accessible. Okay, world building. Okay, so I kind of talked, like she set up the structure of her world so that you kind of understood what was going on, or like these different worlds, these different countries, these different factions, these different kingdoms, queendoms, etc. And they all had different geographies to them. Some of them were like in the desert, and some of them were by the coast, and like some of them were in like large castles. So like you got like a sense of place for each of them. Like it wasn't laden, like I said about the writing, it wasn't laden with descriptions. Like you're not being told what everything looks like and what the scenery looks like. But like when a character is parched, and like when like the cool salty breeze is on a character, like you get like kind of little like sprinklings of description to kind of give you a sense of place, but it's not heavily described. I think that with world building, this is where I want to talk about magic, because there is a magic introduced fairly early on with the Priory, where you have this magic that you get from something. So it's a magic that runs out. And I liked that. I found it interesting in how it was used, and I liked that there was some sort of like limitations on the magic. And then there's an additional magic that is brought into play. And without giving anything away, just how those things interacted didn't make sense to me. And I think this has to do with the plot not totally making sense. It just felt like it was this way because the author wanted it to be this way. I thought that there were moments, and I was actually doing this as a buddy read, and there are things that I thought would have been interesting to happen with this magic that didn't really come to fruition, which obviously is not the author's fault. They were my ideas, not hers. But I felt that there was a lot more you could do with the magic than what she did with it. Probably should have talked about this at the beginning, but we'll just talk about difficulty. So, I mean, this is a hurdle to read because it's 800 pages, and it's hard to want to get into an 800-page book for some people. It is a standalone, so you're not going to have to read more books after this. This has a definitive end to it. I would say that the reading goes really fast. So I don't find this a difficult book to read. If you take the time, as I said earlier, to learn the world, learn the character names, and kind of like center yourself as you're reading in the first few hundred pages, there's not much else that makes this difficult besides the length. Like, the writing is easy to get into. It's a very fast read. Like, it doesn't feel like an 800-page book as you're reading it. Yeah, I would say that if you want to read this, the 800-page mark shouldn't be a hurdle to you because you've probably read like denser 600-page books. Like, that's the kind of, it's very light, easygoing. So themes are a hard thing to talk about with this book because it wasn't theme heavy. Like, there is the underlying concept of religion. We do have character arcs that do kind of center around religion and like the idea of how religions start and how they develop and like what makes a religion true, and like characters kind of find themselves through that, and like the importance of faith in your religion. And then outside of that, like there's like the characters have to deal with destiny and like finding their destiny, being okay with their destiny. That's kind of an underlying idea here. It's not really like explored as a theme, but I think that's why it's a hard thing to talk about. This book wasn't that theme heavy. Okay, let's get into, should you read this or not? Are you the right reader for this book? I would say if you're looking for a fantasy that you can kind of nitpick the plot, like you can get invested in the plot, but you have to believe everything that's happening, and you want heavy thematic content in your book, this isn't the book for you. If you are looking for a fun read where you don't have to, aside from the first few hundred pages where you're like kind of getting the lay of the land, you don't have to think too much. Yeah, something kind of coincidental happens, but like it's fine. The plot's fun. We got dragons, we got magic, we got queendoms, we got politics. Like, we don't need this to be too deep. If that's the type of reader you are, then I think you'll enjoy this. My experience with this book was that I enjoyed it for what it was. I did not find a lot of the plot believable. I did not find some of the character arcs very believable. I found a few believable. I found Loth's character arc believable. I liked it, and I enjoyed the relationships between Sabran and Ede. So this book has at its core a sapphic relationship, and you don't see that, or I haven't seen that a lot in fantasy and just in books in general. So I think that that's a big draw to this book for people, is that it has this on display as like a main part of the text. And their relationship was probably one of my favorite parts. It felt the most fleshed out. It felt like one of the goals the author had with this book was developing this relationship between these two characters, and the decision making that they had, and like how their relationship developed, and it felt believable to me. Probably one of the only parts that did. So I think that's all I got for this video. Let me know if you've read this and what your thoughts were about it, or if you haven't read it, did what I say convince you or make you think, maybe this book isn't for me? Anyway, that's all I got. So until next time, happy reading.